Every year, thousands of rescued alien creatures are turned away by shelters across known space. Most of them never make the news. But one story broke every rule in the book. This is the story of a creature so feared. 5 different shelters signed his death order without even meeting him. His species had a name that made hardened soldiers go quiet. The Skarn. Ancient. Powerful. Built for one purpose. War. On paper, he was a monster. A living weapon. A thing to be destroyed before he could hurt anyone else. But the truth behind this story will shock you. Because the person who finally said yes wasn't a doctor, wasn't a soldier, wasn't even part of any rescue team. He was just one tired man on a rundown space station, doing a job nobody wanted, about to make a choice nobody expected. Here's what you don't know yet. You don't know what really happened on the day this creature was labeled too dangerous to save. You don't know why every shelter in 5 different star systems refused to even open his cage. And you don't know what this so-called monster did, months later, that made the entire galaxy stop and rewrite its own laws. This isn't just a story about an animal. This is a story about fear, about courage, and about the one thing strong enough to break through both. Stick with me to the very end, because the final twist changes everything you think you know about who the real monster was in this story. Let me show you exactly how this happened. Kestrel Station floated at the edge of known space, far from the bright, clean cities of the interstellar Concord. It was old. It was tired. Rust ran down its metal walls like dried tears. Most people who worked there had nowhere better to go. Ethan Cole was one of them. Ethan was 34 years old. Before the station, he had been a mechanic in the U.S. Army, back on Earth. Now he loaded cargo crates for a living. 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. It was not an exciting job, but it paid enough to eat. And on a station like Kestrel, that was enough. Ethan was quiet. He kept to himself. But everyone on the station knew one thing about him. He could not walk past someone who was hurting. Not a person. Not an animal. Not anything. His friend Marcus used to joke that Ethan had a hole in his chest where his common sense should be. That morning started like any other. A supply ship docked at Bay 6, carrying crates for auction. Broken machine parts, old mining tools, and, tucked in the back, a cage covered with a black tarp. Ethan noticed it right away. Cages on Kestrel Station were rare. Live cargo meant trouble. He kept loading boxes, but his eyes kept drifting back to that dark shape in the corner of the bay. Then he heard it breathe. It was a low, ragged sound, like something in pain trying not to make noise. Ethan set down the crate in his hands and walked closer. A station guard stepped in front of him fast, blocking his path. "Not your business," Cole, the guard said. "Keep walking." But Ethan had already seen the tag hanging from the cage. Bright red letters, easy to read even from a few feet away. Class 0. Do not approach. Disposal pending. Ethan felt something cold settle in his stomach. He had heard of Class 0 before. It was the highest danger rating in the entire Concord system. Only a handful of species in the whole galaxy carried that label. And every single one of them ended the same way. Destroyed. No trial. No second chance. Just gone. "What is it?" Ethan asked. The guard hesitated, just for a second, A Skarn cub, he said quietly. Found on a smuggler ship 3 days ago. Compliance is handling it. Ethan had never heard that word before. Skarn. But something about the way the guard said it, like it tasted bad in his mouth, told him this was not a normal animal. He waited until the guard walked away to check something on his data pad. Then he moved closer to the cage, slow and careful, the way you approach something wild and frightened. He lifted a corner of the black tarp. What he saw stopped him cold. Inside the cage was a young creature, maybe the size of a large dog, but built like something far more powerful. Its fur was pale white, almost glowing under the dim station lights, marked with soft gray spots like shadows under snow. Its legs were thin from hunger. Its ribs showed through its fur. A heavy metal muzzle covered its mouth, clamped so tight it looked painful. But it was the eyes that Ethan would never forget. Bright gold, wide with fear, watching him the way trapped animal watches anything that comes near. Not with hate, with terror. "Hey," Ethan whispered. "Hey, easy. I'm not going to hurt you." The cub flinched back against the metal bars, as far from Ethan's hand as the small cage allowed. Its whole body was shaking. Ethan had loaded 1,000 crates on the station. He had seen broken equipment, spoiled food, damaged machine parts by the truckload. But he had never seen anything that made his chest hurt like this. He dropped the tarp back down just as footsteps echoed behind him. A tall figure in a gray Concord uniform approached, moving with the stiff, careful walk of someone used to giving orders. This was Compliance Officer Draven Sorn, a Corveth, one of the insect-like species that ran most of the Concord's legal system. Corveth were known galaxy-wide for one thing above all else: cold logic. No emotion. No exceptions. "Step away from the containment unit," Sorn said, his voice flat and even. "It's just a kid," Ethan said. "Look at it. It's starving." "It is a Class 0 specimen," Sorn corrected. "Not a kid. A Skarn. Do you know what that species did at Corvan Outpost 200 years ago?" Ethan shook his head slowly. 12 soldiers, Sorn said. Torn apart in 11 minutes. One adult Skarn did that. Alone, he paused, letting the number sink inches. This is a juvenile of the same species. In 4 years, it will weigh 6 times what it weighs now. It will be strong enough to break through station bulkheads. This is not an animal that needs rescuing, Mr. Cole. It is a weapon waiting to activate. "So what happens to it?" Ethan asked, though part of him already knew the answer. "Directive 7, Sorn said simply. We have contacted every registered shelter within 5 systems. Voss Sanctuary, the Ilnara Ethics Council, Threll Colony Rescue, Corvan Wildlife Authority, Meridian Station. All 5 have declined custody." He glanced at the cage without any feeling in his eyes at all. "In 48 hours, if no shelter accepts responsibility, the specimen will be humanely terminated, as required by Concord law." 48 hours. Ethan looked back at the cage one more time. He could just make out the shape of the cub curled into the smallest ball it could manage, shivering, waiting. That's it. Nobody even tries. "They tried," Sorn said. "Every shelter reviewed the file. Every shelter said the same thing. Too dangerous. Too great a risk. I understand this feels unfortunate to you, Mr. Cole. But logic does not bend for feelings. This is simply how the numbers work. Sorn walked away without another word, already moving on to his next task, as if he had not just described a death sentence for a starving child. Ethan stood there a long time after the officer left. The station kept moving around him, workers shouting, machines humming, cargo carts rolling past. But all he could hear was that ragged, frightened breathing coming from behind the black tarp. He did not know it yet, but his life was about to change forever. And so was the fate of an entire species that the galaxy had already given up on. That night, Ethan could not sleep. He lay in his small bunk, staring at the ceiling, thinking about those gold eyes. Around midnight, he gave up trying to rest and pulled up every file he could find on the Skarn species using his data pad. Most records were old, dry, and full of fear. War records from over 600 years ago. Ethan learned that the Skarn had not evolved naturally at all. They had been built, engineered by an ancient civilization called the Ashani Empire, long extinct now, to serve as living weapons in a war that had ended centuries before Ethan's grandparents were even born. The Ashani had wanted the perfect soldier. Strong, vast, loyal to whoever controlled them. But when the empire finally collapsed, the Skarn were left behind, scattered across a dozen worlds, with no one left to guide them. Without proper handlers, many of the remaining Skarn had grown wild, dangerous, and unpredictable. The Corvan massacre that Officer Sorn mentioned had happened almost 200 years ago, caused by a single adult Skarn that had been abused and starved for years by an illegal breeder before it finally broke free and attacked. One tragedy, 2 centuries old, and it had been enough to brand an entire species as monsters forever. Ethan read report after report, buried deep in an old research file from a xenobiologist named Dr. Ilsa Fenn. He found something the Concord's official records never mentioned. According to Fenn's private notes, Skarn were not naturally aggressive at all. In fact, in every documented case where a Skarn had been raised from a cub with patience, food, and safety, instead of chains and fear, the creature had grown up calm, loyal, and deeply protective of its caretaker. The problem was never the species, Fenn had written. The problem was always what was done to them. Ethan set down the data pad and stared at the wall of his small quarters. 40-something hours left. One tired cargo loader on a broken-down space station, against an entire galaxy's worth of fear and paperwork. He thought about walking away. It would have been easy. Nobody would have blamed him. He had no medical training, no legal standing, no money, and no chance of winning against Concord law if it came down to it. But then he thought about those eyes again. Wide, gold, terrified, waiting for someone, anyone, to say yes. Ethan picked up his data pad one more time and opened a new file. At the top, he typed 3 words that would change everything. Formal adoption request. He knew it probably wouldn't work. Officer Sorn had already made it clear that logic did not bend for feelings. But Ethan had spent his whole life believing in one simple idea. Sometimes doing the right thing does not depend on the odds. He hit submit just before 3 in the morning, station time, and finally allowed himself to sleep, not knowing if his request would even be read before the 48 hours ran out. The rejection came almost instantly. At 6 the next morning, Ethan's data pad buzzed with a message from Concord Compliance. He read it standing in line for the station's cafeteria. his stomach sinking with every word. Request denied. Reason: applicant lacks certification for Class 0 containment. Species designation confirms extreme risk profile. Recommendation: approved shelters only. See attached list. The attached list was the same 5 names Officer Sorn had already mentioned. The same 5 shelters that had already said no. Ethan pushed his tray aside. Appetite gone. He pulled up the file on the cub again, searching for anything, any loophole, any small crack of hope. That was when Marcus found him. Marcus Odom had worked beside Ethan on the loading docks for almost 3 years. He was older, heavier, with a laugh that could be heard 3 corridors away. But right now, there was no laughter in his face at all. "You heard about the cage animal?" Marcus asked, sliding into the seat across from Ethan. "I saw it," Ethan said. "It's a kid." Marcus: "It's terrified and it's starving, and in less than 2 days, they are going to kill it because of something that happened 200 years ago." Marcus was quiet for a moment. "You're not thinking about doing something stupid, are you?" Ethan didn't answer right away. "Ethan," Marcus said, leaning forward, his voice dropping low. "You know what happens if you cross compliance. They don't just fire you. They blacklist you. No station in conquered space hires blacklisted workers. You'd be done. Everywhere." "I know," Ethan said quietly. "So what are you going to do?" Ethan looked up, and for the first time, there was something steady and certain in his eyes. "I'm going to get that cub off this station before the deadline," he said. "One way or another." Marcus stared at him for a long moment. Then he sighed, the way a man sighs when he already knows he's about to do something he'll regret, and said the words Ethan needed to hear. "All right. What's the plan?" The plan was simple in idea and terrifying in practice. Every night, the holding bay where the cub was kept ran on a reduced security shift between 2 and 4 in the morning. Station time, when most of the crew was asleep and cargo traffic slowed to almost nothing. Ethan had watched the shift schedule for 2 full days, memorizing every gap. Dr. Lena Park, the station's overworked and underpaid physician, became the third and final piece of the plan. Ethan had gone to her quietly, expecting another no. Instead, she had listened, looked at the medical scans Ethan had somehow gotten of the cub's condition, and gone very still. "This animal is severely malnourished," she said, almost to herself. "Dehydrated. That muzzle has caused infection around the jaw. If nobody treats this soon, disposal order or not, it will die on its own within the week." "Will you help?" Ethan asked. "Doctor." Park had looked at him for a long moment. "I took an oath to treat suffering when I see it," she finally said. "Nobody said the patient had to be human." That night, just after 2 in the morning, Ethan moved through the dim, quiet corridors of Kestrel Station toward Holding Bay 6. His heart pounded so hard, he was sure it could be heard through the walls. Marcus waited by the maintenance shaft, ready to override the security cameras for exactly 6 minutes, the longest gap he could safely create without triggering an automatic alert. 6 minutes. That was all Ethan had. He reached the cage and knelt down slowly, the same way he had the first time. The cub was awake, curled tight in the corner, watching him with those same wide, golden eyes. "Hey," Ethan whispered. "Remember me." The cub did not move, but its ears twitched, listening. Ethan reached into his jacket and pulled out a strip of dried meat he had saved from his own rations for 2 straight days. He held it out slowly, palm open, staying as still as he could. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then, inch by careful inch, the cub crept forward, sniffing at the air, until finally it took the food gently from Ethan's open hand. Something in Ethan's chest loosened, like a knot finally coming undone. "Good," he whispered. "That's good. I'm going to get you out of here. I promise." He worked fast after that, hands shaking as he used the tools Marcus had given him to override the cage simple lock mechanism. Nothing fancy, just an older model meant to hold ordinary cargo, never designed to contain something the Concord itself had called a weapon. Ethan supposed that even the station's own bureaucracy hadn't expected anyone to actually try to save the thing. The lock clicked open. The cub flinched at the sound, but did not run. It watched Ethan, waiting, trusting him in that fragile, uncertain way that only frightened creature learning to hope again could manage. "Come on," Ethan said softly, scooping a thick blanket around the cub's thin body. "We don't have much time." The cub did not fight him. It pressed its small, shaking body against his chest as he lifted it, as if it had been waiting its whole short life for someone to simply pick it up and carry it somewhere safe. They made it back through the maintenance shaft, with barely a minute to spare before the security feed reactivated. Dr. Park was waiting in her small clinic, doors locked, lights dimmed low. She worked fast and quiet, cleaning the infection around the cub's jaw, carefully removing the heavy muzzle at last, and setting up a warm nutrient drip. By sunrise, station time, the cub was sleeping peacefully for what Ethan guessed might have been the first time in its entire short life. But peace on Kestrel Station never lasted long. By mid-morning, the alarm had already gone out. Officer Sorn arrived at Ethan's quarters with 2 armed Concord enforcers, his expression as unreadable as ever, though something in his tone had sharpened. "The Class 0 specimen is missing from containment," Sorn said. "Security logs show a 6-minute gap in surveillance last night. I trust you know nothing about that, Mr. Cole." Ethan met his eyes and said nothing at all. "Harboring a Class 0 creature is a violation of Concord Directive 7, Sorn continued. "The penalty includes seizure of assets, permanent station blacklisting, and up to 2 years of labor service. I am giving you one chance, right now, to return the specimen voluntarily." Ethan's hands were steady, even though his heart was pounding. "No," he said simply. Sorn tilted his head slightly, an oddly human gesture from such an alien face. "You understand what you are risking for a creature with no legal standing at all." "I understand," Ethan said. "But I'm not handing him back to be killed." For the first time since Ethan had met him, something flickered across Officer Sorn's face that almost looked like curiosity. "Then you leave me no choice," Sorn said. "Effective immediately, you are relieved of your duties on Kestrel Station, and a formal search order will be filed." The enforcers searched Ethan's quarters, but Marcus had already helped move the cub to a hidden compartment deep in the cargo hold of Ethan's small personal ship, a battered old hauler he had bought years ago with his military discharge pay. It wasn't much, but it was his, and it was the only place left in the galaxy that Concord law couldn't easily search without a proper warrant, at least not yet. That night, with Marcus and Dr. Park's help, Ethan quietly moved the cub aboard his ship, said a hard goodbye to the only home he had known for the last 4 years, and launched into open space just before Kestrel Station's morning shift began. Behind him, an entire station buzzed with the news. A human had broken interstellar law to save a creature the whole galaxy had already sentenced to death. Ahead of him lay open, unknown space, a growing bounty on his head, and a small, frightened cub who had no idea yet just how much his entire life had already changed. The first few weeks on the run were the hardest Ethan had ever lived through, harder even than his years in the military. He kept his ship, which he had nicknamed the Wanderer, moving between quiet, unregistered docking points, small mining outposts, and half-abandoned trade stops where nobody asked too many questions, as long as you paid in raw ore instead of credits. Slowly, carefully, the cub began to heal. Dr. Park had sent Ethan home with a full case of medical supplies and a data file of treatment instructions before he left. And every single day, Ethan followed them exactly, cleaning wounds, tracking weight gain, adjusting the careful diet meant to slowly rebuild months of starvation damage. It was Marcus, over a scrambled comm call one quiet evening, who finally asked the obvious question. You gonna keep calling him the cub forever, or does he get an actual name? Ethan looked over at the creature curled up on a blanket in the corner of the ship's small common room. In the dim evening light of the cabin, the cub's pale fur seemed to catch and hold every bit of light in the room, almost glowing, the way stars glowed against the dark of open space. Orion, Ethan said quietly. His name is Orion. As if he understood, the cub lifted his head and looked directly at Ethan, gold eyes steady now instead of frightened. It was the first time Ethan had seen him look truly calm. Over the following weeks, the bond between them deepened in ways Ethan could never have fully explained to anyone who hadn't seen it happen. Orion grew quickly, filling out from a starving, fragile cub into a strong, healthy young scarn, though still far smaller than the terrifying adult size the old conquered records had warned about. But the aggression the records promised never came. Instead, Orion followed Ethan everywhere on the ship, curling up beside him while he worked on engine repairs, resting his head on Ethan's knee during long, quiet nights drifting through empty space. When Ethan was sad, missing his old life on Kestrel Station, Orion seemed to sense it instantly, pressing close against him in silent comfort. Dr. Ilsa Fenn's old research notes had been right all along. It had never been about the species. It had only ever been about what was done to them. But peace, even quiet peace on the edge of nowhere, never lasted long for a fugitive and his so-called weapon. Word of Ethan's escape had spread far faster and far wider than he ever expected. What began as a simple conquered search order slowly transformed into something much larger. Rumors twisted the story with every retelling. Human who had stolen a living weapon. A rogue scarn loose somewhere in conquered space. A bounty growing larger with every week that passed. It was Marcus, through careful, coded messages sent whenever it was safe, who first warned Ethan about the danger closing in from an entirely different direction. There's a group asking around, Marcus's message read. Not conquered. Vantic Syndicate. Word is they've heard about your cub and they're very interested. Not in helping him, Ethan. In using him. The Vantic Syndicate was a name Ethan had heard whispered before, always with fear attached. A black market weapons network operating in the gaps between conquered law, dealing in illegal tech, banned substances, and, apparently, ancient bioweapons, whenever they could get their hands on one. If the Conquered wanted to destroy Orion out of fear, the Syndicate wanted him for a far darker reason. They wanted to study him, to break him down, to figure out exactly what had made the Ashani Empire's ancient war beasts so powerful, and then find a way to recreate that power, this time under their own control. Ethan read the warning twice, then looked over at Orion, now sleeping peacefully in the corner of the cabin, completely unaware of the growing danger circling ever closer. "I won't let that happen," Ethan said quietly to the empty room. "Not to you. Not ever." But out in the vast, indifferent dark of space, promises were easy to make and terribly hard to keep. The Syndicate found them 11 days later, at a quiet refueling stop near the edge of a dying red star system called Perrin's Drift. Ethan had thought the location was safe, remote enough that nobody would think to look there. He was wrong. 3 unmarked ships dropped out of hyperspace just as Ethan finished refueling the Wanderer, surrounding his small ship before he even had a chance to power up the engines. A voice crackled over his comm system. Calm, almost friendly, in a way that somehow made it more unsettling. "Mr. Cole, my name is Reyes. I represent parties interested in your cargo. We are not here to hurt you. We just want the Skarn." Ethan's hands tightened on the ship's controls. Behind him, he heard Orion growl low in his chest, a sound Ethan had never once heard him make before, deep in warning and entirely unafraid. "He's not cargo," Ethan said into the comm, forcing his voice steady. "And he's not for sale." "Everything's for sale, Mr. Cole," Reyes replied smoothly. "The question is just what it costs. We can do this the easy way, or we can do this the hard way. Either way, we're leaving with the Skarn." Ethan knew, with a cold certainty settling deep in his stomach, that the Wanderer's old, outdated engine stood no chance of outrunning 3 armed Syndicate ships. He had no weapons capable of fighting them off. He had no allies close enough to help in time. For the first time since he had made the choice to save Orion, Ethan felt truly, completely out of options. That was when Orion moved. The docking bay's outer doors blew open with a force that sent Ethan sprawling backward, and 3 armored figures dropped through the breach before he could even reach for cover. Orion stood directly between Ethan and the intruders, no longer the small, frightened cub Ethan had carried out of that cage months ago. What happened next, Ethan would later struggle to fully describe, even to Marcus and Dr. Park. Orion's pale fur seemed to shimmer and bend the dim cargo bay light around him, blurring his outline just enough to throw off the aim of the first shot fired his way. He moved impossibly fast, closing the distance to the nearest attacker in less than a second, and let out a sound unlike anything Ethan had ever heard before. A deep, resonant roar that seemed to vibrate through the very metal walls of the ship. The sound wasn't just loud. It was disabling. The attacker's weapon sparked and died in his hands. Electronics scrambled by whatever strange frequency Orion's roar carried. 2 more Syndicate soldiers dropped through the breach, and Orion moved between them with terrifying precision, never once biting, never once using the claws Ethan knew could easily tear through solid metal. He simply disarmed them, knocked them down, and pinned them in place, powerful but controlled, protecting without destroying. It was over in less than a minute. Reyes' voice crackled back over the comm, no longer calm at all. Fall back now. The 3 syndicate ships broke formation and vanished back into hyperspace as quickly as they had arrived, leaving their 3 disarmed soldiers behind, unconscious but alive. Ethan sat frozen on the cargo bay floor, staring at Orion, who turned back toward him now, gold eyes calm again, and gently pressed his large head against Ethan's chest, checking on him the exact same way Ethan had checked on him back on Kestrel Station, all those months ago. "You saved my life," Ethan whispered, still in shock. Orion simply leaned into him further, as if the answer was obvious. Of course he had. But the fight at Perrin's Drift had not gone unnoticed. A passing merchant vessel had captured the entire confrontation on its external sensors, and within days, the footage had spread across every corner of conquered space, from small trade outposts all the way to the highest levels of the interstellar Concord's ruling council itself. The galaxy was about to learn the truth about Orion, whether it was ready to or not. The Interstellar Concord Council called an emergency hearing 3 weeks later. Ethan stood before them, exhausted, unshaven, with Orion sitting calmly at his side, and told the whole story from the beginning. The cage, the 48-hour deadline, the 5 shelters that had said no without ever meeting the creature they were condemning. Officer Sorn, called as a witness, confirmed every detail, his flat Corvath voice somehow making the facts land even harder in the silent chamber. Then a name came up that changed everything. A retired Ashani archive, recovered decades earlier from a dead moon and never fully translated, was finally decoded by Concord researchers during the investigation. It revealed something the ancient empire had hidden from the very beginning. The Skarn had never been simple weapons at all. They had been built with a deliberate failsafe, hidden trait meant to stop them from ever becoming true monsters. A Skarn would only unlock its full protective strength when bonded to a caretaker capable of patience and compassion, even in the face of fear. Every uncontrollable Skarn in history, including the one at Corvan Outpost 2 centuries ago, had simply never once been shown kindness at all. Here is the twist nobody saw coming. The ancient empire that built the Skarn as weapons of war had, without meaning to, built something else entirely. A test. A mirror. A species that could only become dangerous in the hands of the fearful, and only become a protector in the hands of the kind. For 600 years, the galaxy looked at the Skarn and saw a monster, because every single time, fear was the only thing anyone had offered them. It took one tired cargo loader, with nothing to gain and everything to lose, to offer something different. Patience. Food. A gentle voice in the dark. The Concord Council reclassified the Skarn species that same week, lifting the Class 0 designation entirely and creating a new supervised adoption program, open, for the first time in recorded history, to human caretakers specifically. Shelters across 5 systems that had once turned Orion away began quietly reaching out, asking Ethan for guidance on other rescued Skarn still waiting in cages, still waiting for someone to say yes. The cub nobody wanted became the very reason an entire species was finally given a second chance. And somewhere out in the quiet dark of conquered space, reports are already surfacing of other Class 0 creatures, rescued not by trained scientists or elite soldiers, but by ordinary humans willing to risk everything for something the rest of the galaxy had already given up on. If this opened your eyes to how much fear can shape a story, wait until you hear what happens next. Let's bring it all together. A creature the whole galaxy called a monster was never actually the danger. Fear was. One person's choice to offer kindness instead of judgment didn't just save a life. It rewrote an entire species' future. And sometimes the bravest thing anyone can do is say yes when everyone else has already said no. If this story moved you, hit that like button right now. It genuinely helps this channel reach more people who need a story like this today. Subscribe and turn on notifications, because we release new HFY Sci-Fi stories just like this one every single week. And you will not want to miss what comes next in Orion's story. If you want to go deeper into this universe, check out the playlist linked below, packed with more stories about humans doing what the logical species never could. And if you want early access to new episodes before anyone else, along with behind-the-scenes lore about the Skarn and the Ashani Empire, join our free story newsletter using the link in the description below. Now here's a question for you. If you were in Ethan's place, with only 48 hours on the clock and everyone around you saying no, would you have made the same choice he did? Drop your answer in the comments below. I read every single one, and I'll be featuring some of the best responses in our next video. Thank you for watching all the way to the end. Stories like this only work because of viewers like you who actually care enough to sit with them. We'll see you in the next one.